Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, congratulations on your appointment. Good to see you continuing in a senior national security role for government. Is it the case there was a United Workers Union industrial action at detention facilities on Friday?
Senator, that is correct.
What can you tell us about that industrial action?
Senator, I'll ask Deputy Commissioner Holman to join me at the table and we'll work through that for you.
Thank you.
Senator?
Deputy Commissioner, what can you tell me about the industrial action at detention facilities on Friday?
Thank you for your question. Vanessa Holban, Deputy Commissioner, Regional Operations, Australian Border Force. So we are aware of protected industrial action that took place on Friday and took place again today. So there are ongoing conversations, discussions that we in the ABF and Department are having with Serco. So they relate to industrial agreement, enterprise agreement discussions between Serco and their workers.
Okay. As part of the contract with Serco, are they required to provide a minimum number of staff on duty at detention centres?
That I would need to take on notice, Senator.
Okay. Did the industrial action impact on the ability of the facilities to deliver what they're required to?
No.
There were no security incidents as a result of the industrial action or during the industrial action?
We've had two security incidents during the industrial action being undertaken.
Right. What were the security incidents?
We had detainees on the roof at Melbourne Immigration Detention Centre.
At only the Melbourne Immigration Detention Centre?
As far as I'm aware, yes, Senator.
There was no detainee on the roof at Villawood Detention Centre?
Not that I'm aware of, but I will take that on notice to be exactly 100% sure.
I would encourage you to check that, and if there's anyone in the room who has any knowledge of that, if they could come forward to assist, that would be helpful.
I will ask Assistant Commissioner Sarah Nicholson
Thank you.
to assist.
Good evening, Senator. Sarah Nicholson, Assistant Commissioner for Onshore Detention. Yes, you are right. There was also a detainee on the roof at VIDC on Friday evening.
Okay, so 3 security incidents during the industrial action, or 2 at 2 different facilities?
Correct.
2, okay. So 1 at the Melbourne Detention Centre and 1 at Villawood in Sydney. Right. Who normally responds to a security incident like that?
Serco, Senator.
But who in Serco's team? Is there a particular division or function that's responsible for that?
It could be their emergency response teams. So they've got ERT teams that are situated in every centre. It could be a detainee services officer that also responds. The initial response will be those that are closest to the incident. Just in relation to the Melbourne incident, Ms Nicholson can correct me, but I think that incident, the detainee was on the roof for approximately 5 minutes.
Okay. Do we know how long the detainee was on the roof at Villawood Detention Centre?
I would need to take the exact time on notice,
Okay.
but I believe it was about 15 minutes, but I wanted to take the exact time on notice.
Where were the emergency response teams at Villawood and Melbourne when these incidents occurred?
Senator, I would need to take that on notice.
Is it the case that the emergency response teams were on the picket protesting while there were detainees on the roof?
Again, so I would need to take that on notice. I don't know the makeup of those officers that were taking the action.
And is it the case that it took longer than it normally would to respond to the security incident because the emergency response teams were on strike?
I'll take that on notice, Senator.
What's the normal length of time it takes an emergency response team to get someone off the roof or respond to a security incident?
It depends on the situation, it depends on where the incident is occurring in the centre. So it depends solely on what's the incident, what is the incident, the circumstances of it. So it can vary, Senator.
So there's no standard or expectation that ABS have of a service provider to respond to incidents within a certain time frame? Ms.
Not
Nicholson?
that I'm aware of. I think the expectation is as soon as possible.
How can you evaluate their performance on things like security if you don't have a standard to measure them against?
Within the contract, certainly that there are provisions to inform us of an incident. So part of our performance management framework is the timeliness of reporting the incident to the ABF. I would need to take on notice if there's provisions within the contract to respond to an incident. Our provisions are about reporting, and then obviously we also do post-incident reviews on each of those incidents that meet a certain threshold.
It would be strange if there wasn't something in the contract or in the performance framework that you mentioned that didn't go to incident responses, because otherwise you could have a service provider who wasn't incentivised or appropriately motivated to promptly deal with incidents. Presumably promptly responding to security incidents is better than not promptly responding to them.
Well, the expectation is that they promptly respond.
Sure.
But I would take that further detail on notice, Senator.
Ms Nicholson, you're not aware of anything in the contract?
Not to that level of detail. We'll need to take that on notice. Serco are required to respond to incidents as soon as possible, particularly those security-related incidents. And as the Deputy has said, a detainee being on a roof protesting about something may have been because they didn't like the meal and they wanted something changed. There's a whole raft of reasons why someone would be on a roof and the time in which they would come down.
So is it your evidence that, to at least your state of knowledge now, that is not, that as soon as possible is not defined in any way in the contract or the performance framework?
So
I would need to take that on notice.
Officers are saying they don't have that detail and they'll take it on notice.
Yeah, okay. Is there any way we can get that answer tonight?
Yes, I think we will certainly attempt to get
Right.
that to you before.
Thank you, I'm grateful for
finish
that.
tonight.
Has the Department or ABF briefed the Minister on the potential impact of the strike action?
Yes.
What form did that briefing take? Was it in writing, was it in person?
Written correspondence.
Okay, and what was your advice to the Minister?
Well, I'm not sure that officials can disclose advice that's provided to ministers. They can disclose the fact that advice was provided, but I've been through this many times before, and officials are not able to disclose the precise advice that they've provided.
There's specific grounds which they can refuse, and if a public interest immunity claim needs to be made, happy to hear that out. But
if they choose, they're able to take on notice the question to then determine whether an immunity should be claimed.
what would be sensitive about the advice you provide to the Minister of the impact of strike action at a detention facility?
Well, that's a matter for the officials to determine.
That's what I'm asking. I'm asking them to provide
Senator
it.
Patterson, when I used to be in your chair, I used to try this on and get officials to tell me about advice they provided to ministers. It's not permitted. It wasn't permitted when I was in opposition. It's not permitted now.
Well, the Senate determines what's permitted, not the Minister at the table. Let me ask a different way. What concerns does ABF have about the possibility of the impact of this strike action?
Our overarching responsibility is to ensure that we have a safe and secure immigration detention network. And that requires us to work with our service providers, both healthcare and for welfare and garrison, to ensure that we have an appropriate level of staffing within those centres to manage those centres. So that's paramount for us to ensure that we actually have a staffing footprint that can respond to incidents, provide medical. Really, this is about us ensuring that we work with our partners closely so that we don't have our atmospherics, as we call it in the detention network, rising.
It's obviously not ideal if you have detainees on the roof, whether it's for 5 or 15 minutes or 1 minute. That's not a secure environment for the detainees or for the staff, is it?
No, we've had detainees on the roof at other times across the year and across the years without industrial action. So as Ms Nicholson has provided in her evidence, there's a range of reasons why a detainee might get on the roof.
Well, if you could take on notice what the usual response time is when an incident like this happens,
Yes,
that would
we'll
be
take it on
helpful.
notice.
What action, if any, has ABF taken to stop the strikes?
So ongoing conversations with Serco, and I've not been personally involved in those conversations, but my staff have, and also as a collective with the UWU, so United Workers Union, really to ensure that we have a safe and secure network, and the negotiations will continue between UW and Serco, and we will be involved in those as they progress.
Has ABF or the department taken any action in the Fair Work Commission?
Yeah, I was just about to say, we've
Yes.
taken some legal action. Michelle will take you through
That
that.
would be helpful. Thanks, Michelle.
Yes, so today we had a matter heard in the Fair Work Commission. We made a Section 424 application to suspend or terminate the protected industrial action. The Fair Work Commission heard the evidence and submissions today. Sorry, you'll forgive me for reading. It's just this was happening live as we were going. So, the matter was adjourned this afternoon, and I understand the Fair Work Commission will publish its decision in about 5 days, I think.
Okay. So did the government attempt to take any action at the Fair Work Commission on Friday when the first two stop work meetings
My
happened?
understanding is, as Ms Holborn has outlined, we certainly raised our concerns with Serco and with the relevant union about the safety and security of the facilities. We were given some assurances that the level of staffing would be sufficient. After the disturbances at Villawood, the department formed the view that that we did consider that the safety and security of the facilities could be at risk if the action went ahead, and that was why we filed today in the in the Fair Work Commission.
Where did you file today? What time?
We filed yesterday.
Oh, yesterday. Okay.
So we filed, I think it was about 7 or 8 p.m. last night.
Yep.
It was late.
You've said that the Fair Work Commission will publish its decision in 5 days. Does that mean the union's entitled to continue to take protected action until then?
I understand that there's a non-publication order over what the Fair Work Commission said today. So
Right. So it's possible there's some kind of interim order that prevents further industrial action and a final decision will be made in 5 days?
I'm hesitant to say any, without having seen the terms of the non-publication order. I'm reluctant to answer your
Sure, I don't want to
question.
get you in trouble even in this setting, but just for clarity though, it kind of is important whether or not the union can continue to take protected action or not. When will you know whether the union can continue to take protected action?
My understanding is that following the hearing and the decision that came down, instead of taking a four-hour stop work action, they were all significantly, so far, and it's still happening, it was scheduled to go from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m, and that in fact what occurred was that they went for shorter periods following the Fair Work Commission's ruling today.
Tonight's action was reduced.
That's right.
Are there any more protected actions planned to your knowledge?
We've not been advised, Senator.
Right. So if it is possible for the union to continue to make these strikes, what contingency plans does ABF have in place to ensure the security of the centres?
So it's really the assurance that we will have, as I said before, an appropriate level of a staffing footprint. We can also work with the department too, particularly on the inflows to detention, because as you know, really what you want is a stable network while this is going on. So we do have to manage the ins and the outs of detention so as to not to increase the number, because of course that increases the risk of incidents. So we've got a multi-layered approach, which is clearly working with Serco. Our contingency planning is to ensure that we've got enough staff within the centres. The ABF also, as you are aware, are in the centres to support any of those other ancillary or supplementary services that Serco provide. That's a very base level of administration.
Sure.
It's not to go in and secure the centre as Serco would do.
So you don't have a kind of any supplementary workforce you can rely on to provide security at the detention centres if...
I understand there had been conversations with Serco about whether there was supplementary staff that they could draw on from their other contracts in corrections, for example. But of course, it's a very different environment. So that would probably, for the ABF, we could discuss that further, but it would be the last resort, just given that it's a very different environment that they'd be working in.
What about ABF staff? Are ABF staff trained to do these roles if need be?
We've certainly, we can certainly do that, and that's part of the contingency planning.
Right, so you have ABF staff on standby if need be?
Correct. We've actually got within Villawood, we're trialling an enhanced, longer staffing footprint for the ABF, so they work longer hours. They're in the centre now till, I think it might be 10 or 11 p.m. at night. So the coverage for the ABF has expanded, and that started a couple of weeks ago. So that does give us also some further coverage into the evening.
I have to share
Senator,
the call in a moment. Senator Patterson.
Sorry, just one further point. Sorry, it's a bit of a live one. We should, so the union is required to give us 3 working days' notice, and we understand that we should get the Fair Work Commission's decision before there's any further action. Before
So the union hasn't notified of any action in the next 3 days?
No.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks.